Okay, guys, we are kicking off with our vision and our values. This is an exciting talk, and we're going to run through a lot of stuff to make sure you feel really looped in with this thing, Just Love. There's going to be a lot of information. Don't worry about remembering it all, but I just want to give you a big old taste of this thing you've joined in with. Now, everything is made up of stories. I do believe that to be true, of individual stories meeting other individual stories, and Just Love is no exception. It's just the interlocking of many individual stories that have formed this now reasonably big and very beautiful community. So let me tell you the story of Just Love and how it began, and therefore you came into this room that you're sitting watching this video. So back in 2013, there was a student called Tom. Now, Tom was and is quirky, creative, inventive, kind, and driven. Tom loves Jesus. And at the point that our story begins, one summer, he was in a bit of a wrestle. See, he was reading his Bible, and he was also reading a book called The Irresistible Revolution. And he was seeing how central justice is to the Bible, and also how comfortable most Christians just are. How different their lives often look from the radical cool that the gospel invites us into. And at the same time, he went on a mission trip that sort of slapped him in the face with the privilege he existed off just because of where he happened to be born. So he began to experience a deep discomfort at the difference he saw between the Bible's evident commands to love your neighbour as you would like to be loved, and the cosy Christian student bubbles he'd come to know that didn't engage with justice at all, sort of saw it as something saved for the holy few, or just a token action to tick off every now and then. So his heart was getting broken for injustice, and his eyes opened to all that the Bible calls us to be. So he went back to uni and found out that someone was organising something to see how they could meet the needs of the rough sleepers in his city. He went along expecting to find his people, but there was only a few there. And then not long after, his church, a big thriving church in the heart of the city, had been organising an anti-slavery march, and he went again excited to find the people in his church that cared about justice, and there were no students. Why was justice so separate from what it meant from the Christian students in his city to follow God, when it's not at all separate in the Bible? So Tom eventually managed to gather a group of friends, and they began to ask questions like that one, and others. What if Christian students didn't stay in holy huddles? What if they were so in love with God, so compelled by his Spirit and convicted by his word, that they had to do justice? They couldn't help. What if thousands of students spent their time at university in communities that were willing to grow together and challenge one another? Communities that prayed fervently, volunteered faithfully, and campaigned fiercely to see God's justice. A generation committed not to just putting plasters on the world's pain, but continually ministering to it until we see the Lord's long-term redemption and restoration, knowing we won't see it in its fullness now, but choosing to anticipate it and point towards it. What if a breed of students spent their time at uni being trained and equipped, learning from experts, practicing rhythms of selfless love and radical generosity, serving their city for years, interceding, rejoicing, lamenting, letting the Lord convict them on their lifestyles and offering their all to him as an act of worship? What if they spent their time at uni speaking truth to power through campaigns, fundraising thousands for amazing charities, and having developed rhythms of rest that are vital to sustaining a pursuit of justice for the long haul? What if they then graduate and go and start making ripples in the rest of the world for the rest of their lives? Imagine what could happen. Imagine if some go and live in the toughest estates in the UK, prepared to sow love and faithfulness in those places. What about if others went and injected integrity into politics, or truth and hope into media, or social conscience and generosity to the business world? What if they brought effectiveness to the charity sphere, or compassion to the church, or unerring commitment to education and social work? What if they have spent their time at uni in the way they've described, been formed in the habits, values, theology and practice that I've described? What if they then graduated into the criminal justice system, the arts, the science, technology, healthcare, finance? What if others graduated dreaming of family life where fostering and adopting is not a last resort but the first choice, or eager to earn any way they are skilled to do so and give half of their income away? Imagine how different society would look. So Just Love began in 2013 with a heart to see Christians inspired and equipped to pursue justice in the way of Jesus. It started in Oxford and quickly spread to Durham and then Cambridge and then Glasgow and Bath and Exeter and on and on and on, and it went. And we've grown a lot since then. There's 15 groups now, an apprenticeship and a network of around 750 non-uni students. And our purpose has expanded too. Whilst initially we existed to inspire Christian students that justice is important, it's not the only thing we do now, because these days Christian students, as you may know, they tend to care about injustice. That is much more common, but responding to injustice is still not very common. Because as individuals, we see the enormity of the problem around us and we ask, but what can I do, so many times, and get dissatisfactory answers so often that eventually, overwhelmed, we numb and we disengage. Maybe you can relate to that. But there are some that engage. But the danger for them is that they're not given the teaching or the tools to do justice well, to do it in the way of Jesus. And then they're at risk of developing saviour complexes or cynicism, or doing it in a tokenistic way, or just burning out. Whether Christian students haven't realised that justice is integral to following Jesus, or they have and they're not sure what to do about it, or they're doing it and frustrated at their church, or they're doing it without the tools and the teaching, doing justice without a good roadmap of how to engage well, without being formed and in the character, the values, the theology and the practices, without being shown how to do it in the way of Jesus, people feel disempowered, and disempowerment breeds disengagement. So that's why Just Love exists, to equip students and support graduates to do justice in the way of Jesus. So that's the story that you're joining in with. That's the story that you're entering into. And I wonder how you came to be a part of Just Love. You're now here. I wonder which camp you maybe found yourself in. The new to justice, the care deeply but overwhelmed. They've been caring for ages but losing sight of God. They've been here for ages and need some training, or maybe a different camp altogether. Whichever one, we are so glad you're here. You are now Just Love. It's a community and you are part of it. We're one big giant collection of people together who long to see God's kingdom of perfect peace and justice on earth as in heaven. Okay, so that's our story, but no, seriously, what is Just Love? Sock it to me straight. Well, it's a great question. It's a network of people pursuing justice in the way of Jesus, fruitfully, holistically, and sustainably. It's a network, it's a community, a big old web of relationships helping one another out. It's a movement of people committed to living and helping one another live justice in the way of Jesus. And we want to be fruitful in that because justice matters in the place of injustice. We don't want to just talk about doing it or give it a go but not get anywhere. We want to bear justice fruit. So we want to do it fruitfully. And we want to be holistically, because we don't think that God just asks for a small part of our life. We want to use our time, our money, our relationships, our vocation, our engagement with culture and consumption to do justice. We want to give God our all, our everything. And we want it to be sustainable, because justice isn't meant to be just a flash in the pan phase when you're at uni. We want to be doing this for our whole lives. Justice is a way of life. So we are a network, a web of relationships doing justice in the way of Jesus, fruitfully, holistically, and sustainably. And there are 6 things that we gather around to do that, 6 practices that help us frame our understanding of and then do justice. So the 6 justice practices at Just Love are loving widely, love widely, live lightly, give deeply, pray boldly, change structures, and serve humbly. And we have 5 values that mark how we do all these: devotion to Jesus, building deep relationships, doing justice well, embracing truth with humility, and raising lifelong leaders. Okay, so cool, you're a community doing justice fruitfully, holistically, sustainably, you're centering around 6 justice practices. Nice, you got some values. What difference is that going to make on injustice? Great question. Let me tell you how we got there. So we're living, quite frankly, in a time of escalating oppression, violence, injustice. Division and fear are running rife. Don't know if you noticed. We think the best way to flip that, to turn the tide and to point towards God's kingdom of perfect peace and justice, are Christians showing up faithfully to the challenges of our times and the times to come. But many of us aren't shown how or discipled. As I said earlier, we don't have the roadmap of how we can engage. So we think the way to change the world is Christians showing up, and the way to help them get there is to form people. We think it's developing this web of relationships that can call on one another, because the big justice movements of our time, they've never been about one person. They've been about a connection of people doing it together, but they need to be formed in the way of justice according to Jesus. So we want to grow people in the theology, the values, the character, and the habits that they need to sustain a pursuit of justice and bear justice fruit. It's not about giving people a bunch of information, but helping them with their formation, so they're set on a trajectory of long-term change and growth towards justice in the way of Jesus. And so at Just Love, that means we have 2 halves. We have our student half, you guys, and we think the student world is a little bit like a greenhouse. It's a place of incubation, great conditions. You've got time, you've got flexibility, you're around friends all the time, and it's a place where lots of us are learning things and figuring it out for the first time. We're like growing more into who we were designed to be and thinking things through. So at this point, formational point in our lives, we want to come alongside people and help them grow in the theology, character, values and practices, and begin bearing justice fruit. We want our Just Love groups, like little greenhouses with a bunch of plants on the inside, to be communities of practice, growing the roots and incubating the things they need to sustain a pursuit of justice in the way of Jesus. We want them to be contagious communities of practice, living out the story of God's restorative justice. And that will be through their learning, through their praying, through their campaigning, through changing their lifestyle, through serving their cities. And as our students are doing those things, as they're learning and acting together, we want for you guys to be growing in personal conviction, to be growing in your spiritual equipping to keep going, in your theological rooting. We want you to be becoming relationally connected with one another, to cheering each other on for the long haul. We want you to be practically activated that you're doing something. And we want you to be critically engaged as you go. And then for post-uni time, we have our Just Love network, which is amazing. This is when we're planted out in the garden. So we've been in these right conditions of having time, being around people in a kind of formational stage for our thinking, to practice justice and grow resilience and figure it out and start being formed. And then we get planted out. And that is where our network comes into play. The network is our lifelong space for support and action in the work of social justice. We're gathered around those 6 justice practices, and there are loads of exciting things going on to help people in the network keep going in justice in the way of Jesus. So what does it mean to be a Just Love student? Well, you're in this greenhouse, you're growing the roots of doing justice, you're in this kind of, formational time of my life, you're growing in the values, the character, the theology, and the habits to do justice. You're getting formed in all these different ways, but what does it practically mean? Well, really simply, being a Just Love student is living out our vision statement together. It is equipping students to do justice in the way of Jesus. And it's moving us towards our vision statement of a network of thousands pursuing justice in the way of Jesus. holistically, fruitfully, and sustainably. So what does that mean? Well, one, it means that you are doing justice in the way of Jesus. It's an overflow of your devotion to Jesus. And one of the things that we are most excited to do is help you figure out, what does that mean for you right now? How do I pursue justice in the way of Jesus in my life? And then secondly, we'd love you to help your friends do the same, starting with the others that you are around you. So if you're in a Just Love group, starting with those guys, but then moving on to others too. And the way we think about this justice journey is something called the spiral. Now, that is a depiction that we have of the journey you might go on in justice. We don't think it's linear. Not everyone has the privilege at starting at the top. And I think I tend to go through it with every single justice issue I learn about. But it starts at a place of disengagement. And then it travels through to a moment of like, this is quite important. I've realised that this is going on. And it moves across to a moment of action where we begin learning, praying, fundraising, campaigning, serving our city, changing our lifestyle. And then it moves down to a place of deepening, where we start thinking like, what is good development? Like, what would a good outcome here? How do we actually get to injustice being undone? And you do some of the deeper thinking. And then we move to a place of fruitfulness, of doing all the stuff that we were doing initially in action, but with some of the thought that went into with deepening. And as I said, we don't all just go through that once. I feel like I've gone on this journey many times over and over. But our job as your staff workers is to help you plod on that journey down the spiral, and is to give you the tools and skills you need to take others with you. So that's been a lot of information. We've told you the story of Just Love. We've told you practically, what is it? It's this community and this network. We've told you about breaking it into our student world, this greenhouse, and then the network in the garden. We've told you about what it means to be a Just Love group. So, recap. We long to see God's perfect kingdom of peace and justice on earth as it is in heaven. And we think a good way to get there is having a network of thousands pursuing justice in the way of Jesus. Can you remember it? Holistically, fruitfully, sustainably. And to do that, we equip students and support graduates to do justice in the way of Jesus. It's all about forming people to be theologically rooted, spiritually equipped, personally convicted, critically engaged, practically activated, and relationally connected to keep going. And we do that by gathering around those 6 practices: praying boldly, living lightly, loving widely, giving deeply, changing structures, and serving humbly. And your part in this is to do justice in the way of Jesus and help others to do the same, to build contagious communities of practice. The emphasis here being that you're letting yourselves be formed and you are doing justice. And we do all these things through our 5 values: devotion to Jesus, raising lifelong leaders, doing justice well, embracing truth with humility, and building deep relationships. So let me just talk you through those values in a little bit more detail. In many ways, we'd rather you just learn the values because we hope that we embody them as a community, but I do have to tell you them because I would love for you to live them out too. And I'd like you to really consciously try and live them out. So if you are in a Just Love committee, why don't you make a note now to check in once a term, ask yourselves how you're living it out as a committee. If you're an apprentice, why don't you make a note to just like check in with yourselves once a term? How am I embodying this? Let's start with devotion to Jesus, because this is the most central and the foundation is where we want to start. We want it to permeate everything and where we want to end. Everything that we do, big and small, needs to exist in and out of this value. If we ever get more passionate about justice than we do about Jesus, then we're in trouble. We do what we do in response to how he's treated us and modelling our treatment of others on him. We love his vision for justice and as the one that we follow and the one we want to emulate. So it's Jesus first and the rest after. And then doing justice well. Christians can often be known for being nice, having good intentions, but not really getting things done, or very sadly, sometimes we've been known as having a really detrimental and harmful impact. That doesn't sound like how we should honour God. We want to do justice really well, the way he intended. And we want to see justice done in a Jesus-like way. So we want the way we practice justice to be done in a thought-through way. You'll hear more about this later on, but one, we want to make sure that we're biased towards action, making sure that our walks of justice never become just like cozy, nice places where we do lots of talking but never do any justice. So of the kind of things that I've often mentioned, serving your city, fundraising, campaigning, praying, changing your lifestyle and learning, those like first 5 we really want to prioritize. We do want to learn, but we want to make sure that it's in balance with doing. It will be hard to attract new people to Just Love if we're only ever talking, but doing justice well requires doing. But then secondly, we do justice well by doing it well, by using our heads as well as our hearts. So that means engaging critically and caring deeply about the quality and impact and sustainability of what we do, thinking carefully about the partners we support and their practices. And if you're not sure how to do this, have a chat with your staff worker or read through our Doing Justice Well resource. It's fantastic. Thirdly, building deep relationships. We follow a relational God, and to follow him means living like him. And so we live out our value by investing deeply in friendships with those around us, creating communities in our groups and in the context that we're in that spur one another on in our pursuit of Jesus and his justice. And we build deep relationships by being open-handed and generous towards those around us. We don't want to be transactional. We want to get to know people. Fourthly, raising lifelong leaders. Leadership is a skill that we're constantly going to be growing on in for our whole life and developing in every setting we find ourselves in. And so at Just Love, we're always wanting to make sure that we make space for others to grow and develop, not just ourselves. We want Just Love to be one of those spaces that people's leadership grows, that when they think about how they've developed as a person and as a leader, that Just Love would feature, not just if they're on committee. So we want to be looking to help others become leaders that they were designed to be, as well as focusing on our own development. And so we live this out when we raise up the leaders around you, when you invest your time in mentoring other people, when you spot places to give responsibility away and prefer others over you. It could be one of the most important things that you do in your time on Just Love. And finally, embracing truth with humility. We do this when we care deeply about what is true and Christ-like and biblical, and at the same time are humble about our limited capacity to fully grasp the total truth this side of new creation. We live this out when we explore different perspectives on issues, when we seek out dialogue and rather than like forcing a particular ideology, when we're okay to disagree but be centered on love, when we treat difference as a gift, not a threat, when we are careful to remind ourselves that we all have so much to learn. So they are our 5 values and our vision. And I'm just going to pray now that, Lord, would you just set our hearts more on fire for your vision, your story, and would you help us enter into it and play our part in it in your way. We love you, Lord. Amen.